Okay, so I'm Jason. That's Brian. We helped Kim from the state OIMT project management team. Go on. Unfortunately, Kim's not here today, but moving forward, our project was to help Kim identify a solution to solve a problem that they currently have. They wanted to be able to track the status of the progress of their projects, and to historical data of analyzing how a project went. So for instance, how successful that social media project went, how much money did they use, how much time did they spend, or how the state health IT project, why it was canceled, how much money they used before they got canceled, or if I want to pursue that project again, what would I need to do to continue, so I don't have to reinvent the wheel and spend extra resources. Unfortunately, this vision or project was not completed, was put on hold. We were able to complete the stakeholders analysis, requirements analysis, and part of a vendor selection. Since we couldn't complete with the vendor selection, we wasn't able to configure the system, customize the system, test the system, or document anything, or even train the users of it. We were able to complete majority of our project documents. Since this project was put on hold, there was no real project impact, so it is a standstill of where they're at. We couldn't better the state of anyhow, so there was no improvement in the state, still where it is right now. Moving forward, if we were able to do this again, the recommendation was to break this project into 2 steps. First step would be to select a vendor, and funding would probably be the first step. And then the second step would probably be the installation of the system. This is a timeline of our project. In November, Kim started the project and got the stakeholder analysis ready and finished it. December was getting the requirements. January, sending out RFIs. February was our first meeting with Kim. Ending the RFI process. In March is where we got the finalize our funding and finalize our vendor selection list. And then in April, we kind of notified where the project was put on hold. Funding was kind of an issue for us. We didn't realize how hard it is to get funding in this state, but we finally got a funding called Hawaii's Capital Improvement Fund. CIP is at $250,000. There was no subcontractor since we couldn't figure out the vendors. Baseline to actual, we did go a little bit over budget because it took a while to figure out the Capital Improvement Fund. And when we did the definition of that fund, it had to be in-house since it was an infrastructure improvement. So we couldn't go host it or whatnot, and that pushed it out a little bit. This is a kind of short, well, it's kind of hard to see, but it's our budget to output. You'll see a graph in later slides. These are kind of imaginary numbers where since it was kind of confidential, we kind of just try to put numbers next to everybody's names. Me and Brian kind of came out short in funding, but Kim kind of spent more time on this project, so there was a little cost variance on it. As you see, our actual costs kind of flatline in February or March. That's where we was told that the project was put on hold, but our planned cost actually was a little higher than the baseline because we had to push back the time of vendor selection because of the funding issue. And now I'll hand this over to Brian.
Well, the first thing we learned is that when we didn't have the funding at the beginning and we were trying to create estimates in both time and cost, it was pretty difficult because we were trying to procure a project management information system and we had no idea what technology we would be using. We did find out they wanted to do everything through one local vendor for support, so we couldn't estimate. We had a hard time even figuring out which vendors could be used because we had no idea what technology stack the subject matter experts would need and things like that. So for the initiation, we think that if this was started again, we'd need to know definitely where the funding was coming from and if there were any requirements related to that funding. We didn't actually reach much of the executing and closing stages, so there's nothing really there. The other problem is that the project charter was actually created after the project started. So we didn't really have a true steward. So she couldn't devote, even though due to a condensed timeline, she couldn't devote all her time to it because we didn't really have a project steward that could back her and make sure things got done. The other thing, the scope, as we mentioned, the time and the resources were hard because of our technological solution wasn't known. So because we think this thing should probably be broken into two separate projects, one to procure the system and select it, and then another one to install it. Ours was one system to do the entire thing. And as we mentioned, there were a lot of confidential pieces to this that only Kim could work on. Like, we never were directly in contact with the vendors because of confidentiality things, and a lot of the actual funding pieces we weren't privy to. So, unless she had 100% of her time to devote to it, it made it really difficult for her to keep everyone in the loop, and she kind of became a bottleneck, even though she did a really good job, because she had other competing priorities. The cost wasn't really an issue in our project because we never reached the actual part where any money would need to be spent, because Kim is an actual employee and we were interns. And all of the things that we were doing, the team communication, everything, we had no materials because everything was virtual. The quality we didn't really get to because we never completed the project. From a human resources perspective, our team worked really well together. The problem is we just kept getting bottlenecked at different points. Communications, we had all different types of communications. We communicated through email. We used Dropbox to sync up all our documents. We had in-person and online meetings, so the communication went really well. The risk to this project was pretty much what happened in that because Kim was the only actual state of Hawaii employee on here, and there were a lot of confidential things, she was the only one that knew the entire project. So we didn't know the whole project. So when she became unavailable, there was no one really that could pick it up. And for the procurement part, the RFI worked really well, and we were able to analyze the things they gave us to help her sort out which solutions were viable and which ones weren't. But the problem is, like we mentioned before, they were all completely different technologies, and there were all kinds of challenges that in the vendor selection process. And for the follow-up, like we said, we think this would be much better served by being broken into two smaller projects. One to actually just procure the system, and then another one to focus on integrating it, because it would be easier to search for vendors and local employees if in-house was needed, if we knew exactly what we were dealing with. And that's it. Oh, no questions. Yeah.